I know you're a man of faith. I know, given your background and some of the things I mentioned in the intro, I think the embodiment of that value seems very clear.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm curious is, how much of a struggle do you find it? If you're being really honest,
Mm-hmm.
and I ask that in the most genuine way possible, because I often find myself wondering, maybe philosophically, about humans and human nature. Is
Yes.
that a natural tendency? Are some people just born that way and built that way to want to be helpful and want to serve? Or is it a struggle? Is it, our natural inclination, for better or
Yeah.
for worse, is to say, I want to be happy, I want to
Yeah.
think about myself, but you kind of have to force yourself to be helpful? Or does it feel more natural to you?
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful question. And I think anyone who is really honest would have to say it's hard.
Mm,
It's very difficult. And you're right. The human nature is to always take care of yourself first. The human nature is to act like you're on an airplane. And that means when
mm,
the oxygen mask drops, to take care of you first and then take care of others. And classical wisdom would say, hey, if you don't take care of you, you can't take care of others. So I think within helpfulness, there is this aspect that says it is very hard and you have to be really intentional about it. And it's really frustrating and it's maddening and upsets you. And there are days when you're like, I don't want to do this
mm,
anymore and they're not worth it. But I think that you always come back to your center, and your center always says, I get that it's hard, but that doesn't mean we can't do it. I get that it's difficult and frustrating, but that's not a reason for not doing it. So, in just my most transparent nature, I will tell you that there are a lot of days when I don't want to do it. There are a lot of days when I don't feel like it's even worth it. There are a lot of days when, you talk about me being a man of faith. There's a story in the Bible where, Christ heals 10 lepers, and they all go away, and the 10 go away and only one comes back and says thank you. And that's real.
mm,
If you're doing it because you want thank yous and kudos and pats on the back, you're going to be disappointed a lot
mm, mm,
because you're
mm,
not going to get them. So yeah, it's really hard, and you have to be really intentional if you really want to do it.
mm. What is it? So I tend to think of things mathematically, in
Mhm.
terms of how we function and how we work, not necessarily literally, but if you think of it in that way, where it's almost an equation, and you're thinking about the pros and the cons and all that, in those, because in many ways, in exactly what you're saying, I think of it as the math doesn't check out. If you really think about
No.
it, it would seem, right? The math does not check out to do what you're saying. What, but it has to, right? If you're doing it, there must be something. Is it the faith? Is it ultimately Jesus and a faith in God that allows you to offset that equation, to say, even though everything looks like I shouldn't do this today, I'm not getting the thank you, I'm not getting the recognition, I'm tired, I want to just think about me. Is that ultimately what brings you back to say, I'm going to do it anyway?
That's a really good question, and I'm going to be anti-religious for a moment, because there are a lot of people out there that are not religious, but they still do it, right? And so, while I would like to say, from a pastoral standpoint, banging on my pulpit, yes, it all comes back to Christ. The truth of the matter is that I think it all comes back to really our nature. I think it all comes back to just who we are and who we want to be.
Mm,
And some of us cannot attach a religion or denomination or spirituality to that. We just know it's who we are.
mm,
And so I think the math, it's one of those really long equations where the math doesn't add up in the near term, but it always equals out at the end. And I say that because my wife has a saying. My wife's name is Leslie. Leslie has a saying that I absolutely love, and it is, she says, your scars are not for you.
mm,
And so there are a lot of days when you get the scars and you go through the issues and everything else. But at the end of the day, the math is never 1 + 1 = 2. That scar that you have is a two. And so you add it all together. And 10 years later, 9 years down the road, 15 years down the road, you run into someone and you share your story of resilience. You share your story of survival. You share your story of, here's how I overcame. And at that moment, that's when the math adds up.
mm,
At that moment, all of a sudden, for years, 1 + 1 equaled 4. But then you meet someone who needed to hear that story, and who are energized by it, and all of a sudden the math loops back around and it
mm,
equals up to
mm,
2. And I
mm,
think that's really the world we live in. And here's the thing about it: you may not even know that the math equaled up to that point. You may live your life and die and never see the equal come out to what you thought it was going to be. But you've got to know that when you live your life in a certain way, that you're going to touch other people's lives, and some lives you touch, you'll never know. And so you may never see the math equal.
You're articulating that so beautifully, and from where I sit, so accurately, because it articulates what makes it so hard. Because the idea of never knowing if the math is going to add up, and even if you do know 10 years later, to wait those 10 years, right? A conversation like this, which is the right conversation, it's the right words. It's very easy for somebody listening to feel inspired in the moment and feel like, you know what? Ken's right. Like, he's right. I'm going to do it today. But then tomorrow comes, and the next day, and the next day, and it starts to wane, and it starts to feel like you're not getting that recognition. You're not seeing the math add up. To do that every day with an understanding that I may die never knowing if this actually worked out. But it comes back to faith, I think, whether it be a faith in God or just a faith in this way of life, that it's going to work out. That is such a hard thing to do on a day by. It's draining. It's a grind in many ways. Yeah. I'm curious for you. You said it's the person that you are. Was this always the person that you were? Were you kind of raised and this was instilled in you? Did you learn it through lived experiences? Because again, it's not an easy place to get to. How did you get to a place where you could truly live it?